join. Good morning, everyone. Chat is now functioning, so you can type your name in the chat bar and say that you are here. Be sure to do that. Okay. And if there's no questions, I don't see no questions. All right, then let us begin. My phone isn't working for some reason. So this is where we were. Let me bring up the slideshow. And we had just finished talking about ego integrity. At the end of life, you basically are happy with the way that things went, and you have a sense of wholeness about your life. That does not mean that you can't say, I wonder what would have happened if. Certainly it's okay to wonder what would happen if, but you still have a sense of, this is who I am now, and I'm happy with what I am now. And then selective social interaction is at the end of life where we don't have any time. Our life is pretty much, we're old people, 70 years old, 80 years old. We don't have time for fair weather friends. We don't have time for acquaintances. We want people we can trust. We want people we can rely on, and we will do everything that we can to help them as well. And that's selective social interactions. As we age, we become adolescents, and we determine our sexuality and our gender at that point. We figure out who we are, what we are. And it's really interesting because society basically pushes us in one direction. The social cognitive theory indicates that parts of learning is watching other people perform. I feel like I'm a gender male, and so I watch other people that I think must be gender males, and I see how they act. And I determine how I should act based on how they're acting. We also push by our social influences on behavior. For instance, you have a friend who's pregnant who is going to have a little baby girl, so you buy pink things for them and dresses for them and baby dolls for them. You don't buy baseball bats and baseballs and gloves and fire trucks. Why not? So by our own behavior, we're pushing that child in a specific direction. Gender schemes organize our behavior and thoughts. And gender identity is how each of us identifies ourselves, which may not, 5% of us, 5% of human beings are not cisgender, which means cisgender means our physical attributes. I am a male because I have physical attributes that tell me I'm a male, or I'm female because I have the physical attributes of the female. And my gender, I'm a male gender, that's cis. I'm male gender, I feel like I'm a male, and I am a male physically. Or I feel like I'm a female, and I'm a female physically. But 5% of us do not. 5% of us, we feel masculine in a female body, or we feel feminine in a male body. And that's our gender identity. Some tendencies appear to be genetically controlled. For instance, girls tend to organize in small cooperative groups when you put them on a playground. Put 100 girls out on the playground, and they'll break up into groups of 10. So they'll have 10 groups of 10, and they'll play together in a very cooperative manner. Put 100 boys on the playground, and they will stay in a group of 100, beat each other silly until they figure out who's number one and who's the lowest on the totem pole, and then they'll play together well. So very different ways of behaving in the majority of males and females. Individuals can learn to become more aggressive or more cooperative. So boys can become more cooperative and girls can become more aggressive. It's important for males to become more cooperative because males control most of the world's armies. And if you're going to be beating each other up all the time, then we're going to get into wars simply to prove your masculinity and what your hierarchy is. No, that's not what wars are for. And for girls, it's more important for them to be more aggressive because when a male and a female get into a job and they're getting the same amount of salary, and the boss comes the end of the year and says, I'm giving you a raise, and this is your raise. And the males are aggressive. The males say, no, I can't live on that raise. I have a family to take care of, and there are other people out there that want me as a, for a job. There's plenty of jobs out there for me. I'm going to, give me a higher raise or I'll go somewhere else. And the boss has been given a range. They don't tell you what the range is. They just give you the bottom one, and then they can negotiate somewhere in there. Women, they're given that same salary increase, and they go, okay, because they're cooperative. Even if it's a female boss, okay. And so the next year, the male has a slightly higher income, and when he gets his percentage of a slightly higher income is a higher percentage, and so they'll grow faster than the female will. But you got to be careful in this day and age. Unfortunately, we're still in where people that grew up in the 1950s are still in charge, and they don't like aggressive women. My wife teaches at the college also, so we both teach at the college. She teaches computer science, and I teach the psychology classes. And if a student of mine comes to me and says, I need some extra credit, no, it's built into extra credit is built in because there's more points in the class, so I don't give extra credit. And I become, oh, he's tough. My wife gets the same questions. Can we have, what's extra credit we can do? Oh, no, you can't have extra credit. It's already built into the system. There's more points, so you can lose some points. And she's a bitch. And that's the way our society functions at the moment. Women who are tough are looked at very negatively, as where men are looked at positively. He's tough. As tough is not bad. Bitch is bad. So it is a tough place to grow up as a woman, and it's changing slowly. We now have Virginia, who has accepted the amendment for sex, and hopefully now as the next one that has done it, so there are enough states that have accepted that amendment, but it's past its due, and the Congress has to accept that it was agreed to by the majority of states now, and it may not be. It still may not be. So that's the world we live in, and hopefully it'll get more and more equal, but at the moment it's not equal for women as it is for men. When we go into adolescence, it is a definite change in our developmental process, development period beginning at puberty, which is 12 for girls and 13 for boys, and ending around 18. So how we determine whether somebody is now an adult, 18 is where we say it ends. Puberty ends and you become an adult. But how do you define adult? And some people define adult as a person who is not living at home anymore. Well, there are plenty of millennials in their 20s and 30s that are still living at home. So are they not adults? And some people say, well, it's when you have a child. Well, I wasn't until my 60. I was 60 when when we adopted our child, and I still don't have a child of my own. So am I a child myself? An adolescent? Have I not moved into adulthood? There's a whole group of psychologists that are studying what's called emerging adulthood to find out how we describe a person who finally makes it into adulthood. And some countries have just made it really simple by saying, when you turn 18, you're an adult, and that's it. There doesn't have to be anything associated with it. You are an adult at 18 years of age. The rites of passage are the little celebrations that we have that tell us that we are going into a new developmental phase. And they might be, if you're a Catholic, There's a confirmation that Catholics have that show that you've met a specific time in your life. Bar and bat mitzvahs are for Jewish people at 12 and 13, at 12 for girls and 13 for boys. And they are considered adults at that point. But it is not an adult as in, oh, you can have a baby. That has nothing to do with it. They are an adult in the Jewish religion, which means that they can now participate in the religious activities as an adult, and they should give up their childish behaviors now at 12 and 13. The debutante ball is a Southern tradition, and Sweet 16 as well. When you hit 16 years of age, you have this party. Of course, in the age of COVID, we're not having these parties, but they are little things that we do to acknowledge the fact that you are moving into a new position in life. Physical attraction in our teenage years is very important, a really big concern among adolescents, but it's different for girls and for boys. Can you still hear me? Good. I got a message on my machine that said there was something wrong, but good. You guys can still hear me. Okay. So for girls, physical attraction is their attractiveness, but it's very different for African American, Asian girls as it is for Caucasian girls. Caucasian girls have bought into the idea of what marketing and advertising displays to them in magazines, and I'm sorry, but every magazine has a picture of a person who does not exist. It might have started off as a person that is very famous, but then they've taken the software and taken away all their blemishes and made them skinnier or bigger in certain areas. And there's no one that looks like that. It's impossible to look like that. And Caucasian women just buy into that hook, line, and sinker, and you're not going to look like that. So then they feel bad about themselves. We'll talk about this in the motivation and emotion chapter. But African American women and Asian women do not buy into it as much, and they have other people that they look at that are more realistic than the people that are in the magazines. Boys' physical attractiveness has nothing to do with how they look. The ugliest boy in school can be the head of the football team, the quarterback, the captain of the team, and he's number one. He doesn't have to look good, but he's got everything that makes a physical attractiveness, his physical abilities, his sports abilities. And so we look differently for men and women at the way that they are attractive to us in our teenage years. The way our parents interact with us also changes our developmental process, and there are three major categories of the way parents are. There's the authoritative parent, and I try very hard to be the authoritative parent in the family with my child. That is a person who sets the rules, but also allows the rules to be manipulated slightly. So you can come to me and we can talk about it, and I can change the rule for one night. If there's a party that was going on that lasts for longer and started later than it should have, and goes longer than what I allow you to be outside of the house for at night, well, it's an important party and the parents are going to be there, and okay, for this night you can go to that, but the next night it goes right back to the original rule, and I'm willing to negotiate. And the authoritative parent produces best results for a child because they learn to negotiate. They're allowed to negotiate, so they learn to negotiate. When they get back out in the world, they're going to have to negotiate in the world. The authoritarian parent is like my father was. My father was a commander in the United States Navy. What he said was the rules of the house. and they were not going to be changed ever. That was the rule, and you better run by that rule or punishment occurs. And there's no negotiation, none. But there are certain situations where the authoritarian parent is the best. In a war zone or in Detroit, Michigan. I hate to pick on Detroit, but there are places in Detroit you do not want to go unless you know how to use a gun and you're willing to get shot at. So you don't go there. In that kind of situation, your children, you want them to be as safe as possible. They obey your rules. They don't have the capability of making good decisions yet as 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds. They better listen to what you say so that you keep them alive. Now, they may not like you, but you're not there to be their friend. You're there to make sure that they get to adulthood and give you grandchildren. Then there's the permissive parent, and the permissive parent is the person who loves you, certainly, absolutely loves you. But there are no rules. I gave you life. I have a house for you to live in. I give you food and clothing. What you do is what you do. Just do it. Try not to kill yourself. And it produces some really imaginative children, but when they get into real life in college and the school area, and there are rules they have to obey, and they just haven't learned how to negotiate rules, so they're in trouble at that point. Now there's a fourth group. We don't talk much about them because they're a very small group, but they're a miserable group, and that is the neglectful parent, the parent that does nothing for the child, the parent that didn't want a child in the first place, and it's a mistake to have that child, and they don't want to do anything for that child. And for a resilient child, people have a certain spectrum of resilience, and for a highly resilient child, they can make it through that. But for most children without very good resilience, that's going to be a horrible situation for them, and they're going to have issues. So that's your parents. Even your parents affect your developmental process. The brain does change during your adolescence, and your limbic system is in full-blown mode. Your emotions are high. You've got your whole blood system is coursing with all kinds of hormones, and so that hormones produce high levels of emotion. But your limbic system is controlled by the frontal lobes of your brain, and the frontal lobes of your brain don't fully develop until 18. So for the majority of people, the normal population, that they are way more emotional in their teenage years than ever. And they make bad decisions because of that. So adolescents are controlled by their hormones without proper cognitive evaluations, and they take irrational risks. In Virginia, you can't have two adolescents in the car at the same time. At 18, you can be driving, but you're not allowed to have another 17-year-old, 18-year-old in the car with you, unless there's an adult in the car with you too, because the two of them, they will just bat off of each other, and they'll do something stupid because of the connection, the emotions fighting each other. The Sternberg is a psychologist who talks about love, and he says he has a triangular theory of love, and he says that love triangle has three different parts to it. You have a commitment to somebody. You make a commitment, a pledge to another person. And a pledge is, you didn't say, I pledge to you based on hopefully you won't do this, hopefully you won't do this, hopefully you won't do this. You pledge to that person, make a commitment to that person. Commitment isn't broken. Now, if the other person breaks the commitment, that doesn't mean that you should break your commitment unless it's some egregious thing that they've done. But you still have a commitment to that person. And unfortunately, we don't understand commitment today, and that's why our divorce rate's so high, as well as the fact that we think we fall in love with people, and we're not falling in love, we're falling in lust with people. Love comes much later after you've known the person for a while. But you have commitment. Then you have intimacy. The person, you can actually tell that person things about you, and you trust that person will never tell anybody else about them. That's an intimate connection with the other person. You share details about your life with that person. This is not sex. Intimacy in this particular way is not sex. It's just being really connected to another person and trusting that person. And then there's passion. That's the sex part, of course, feeling physically aroused around another person. And we feel physically aroused around whoever it is that physically arouses us. And for 95% of us, that is the opposite sex, but there are people who are asexual. When you see somebody and get that flush in your face, you go, oh, they're amazing, they're gorgeous. They never get that. They are asexual. They do not respond the same way as the rest of us do. And then, of course, there are those who feel that flush toward the same sex, and others who feel the flush toward any human. Doesn't matter what the sex is. So that is the passion that we have around another person. And having all three of these, according to Steinberg, creates the best and strongest relationship for a marriage. The aging process is the final process. Oh, and I think did I mention shyness? Shyness, I've said before, shyness is between 15% of us highly, highly shy. We're born 15% just gregarious, outgoing. The rest of us somewhere in between. And it does not matter where you end up in that group, wherever you are. The shyest you will be, because you have a range that you can reach between. That's your level of what you think is outgoing and what you think is shy. But the shyest you'll ever be in life is in your teenage years. Now getting into the final years of life, we didn't used to live past 60 much. And today we have people living into the hundreds. And supposedly, according to theorists, there is somebody that's been born already on Earth who will live to 150, because we're able to control our diets, and we know what exercise is, and we can control certain aspects of germs and viruses. And so there should be somebody already on Earth right now, a baby somewhere, who will live to 150. But there are plenty of people who live over 100. There are very few people, extremely few people, who live over 120. And hopefully they actually know what they think they know, what causes aging. It's called the telomeres of our DNA. The telomeres are the ends of our DNA. And according to the research, the older you get, and the more your cells are copied and recreated, the smaller those telomeres get, and that's what aging is. And if they can find out what causes these telomeres to reduce and get smaller and smaller, then they can stop the aging process, according to some researchers. They can stop the aging process. They can't reverse it, but they can stop you right where you are. They'll probably do that when I'm like 101 and I'm in a wheelchair and drooling, and I don't want them to stop it at that point. But imagine if they could stop and you could live forever. And they say that even if you could live forever, you wouldn't, because there'd be so many people on the planet that you would die from accidents. And of course, even if they could stop aging, there's still diseases that can kill you. So insurance people say we would never live past the age of 300 anyway. Even if we could live forever, it would be very rare for a person to live past the age of 300. But imagine that, living that long. So we get to be old today, and our old age can be broken down into different parts. There's the young old, the middle old, and the old old. The old old, there are very few of them, and most of them are women. most old people are women. Men die before women do. We don't age as well. And normal aging is how you will age according to your genetics. This is how you're supposed to live and how you're supposed to get old and what's going to happen to you at a specific age. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I had a great-grandfather who lived well past 100. My father smoked and drank, and he died at 83. But that's pathological aging. He had the possibility of getting or being older. His father lived to 85, and his father worked around some bad chemicals, and that's maybe why he didn't live as long. But I have the possibility of living up to 100 years old because I have it in my genetics, as long as I take good care of myself, and I got a good belly on me, so probably not 100. But pathological aging is not normal aging. It's caused by your abuse of your mind and your body through alcohol, drugs, and not eating correctly and not exercising well. And there's all kinds of reasons for pathological aging. And it's probably the main reason we die early is pathological aging. Though we do die from wars and we die from diseases. But if you just die without any specific reason, age-related wise, you probably die early because of pathological aging. In your 40s, you will change. I was born with eagle vision. That means that where it took most people at 20 feet, at 20 feet, we talk about 20/20 vision. At 20 feet, everybody sees 20/20. I could see at 50 feet what other people had to be up close at 20 feet to see. When they said to me, read the smallest text on that chart that you can see, I could read made in, wherever it was made. I had really good vision. Now, as you can see, I'm wearing glasses. I'm 63 years old. I started wearing glasses at 40 because that's when your eyesight starts to go down, your stamina starts to go down, your joints start to hurt a little bit. They don't work as well. You can't run as far as you used to think you could run before, and now you can't run that far anymore. There's a few people who maintain their physical capability, but most of us, we tend to deteriorate starting at 40. And you can see my glasses because they reflect, but you can't see probably that there are 3 lenses here. There is a far distance lens, the medium lens, and the reading lens. I have trifocals because I can't, if I take my glasses off, it's just a blur. I can't read anything, and I wouldn't be able to tell that was me on the screen. So that's at 40. By your 50s, your brain starts to slow down. The processing, perceptual, and reaction speeds are slower. You still can learn. You can learn every day of your life till your last day as long as there's no damage to your brain, as long as there's no pathological aging. In normal aging, you should be able to remember a new thing the last day of your life in the 80s, 90s, 100s. But it takes longer to learn. So if a 50-year-old decides they want to go back to college to learn something, they're going to have to study longer. They're going to have to take longer to get the information, but they will be able to do it. It's not that they're stupid or they're less intelligent because they're older. It just takes longer for them to accumulate the information. If I'm driving along the road at 55 miles an hour and I'm 16 years old, 18 years old, and I see a sign, I immediately know what that sign is. At 63, which is my age, I have to look at the sign, and it takes a minute, not a minute, but there's a definite time frame that I have to, what was that sign and what did it mean? Right? It's a slower processing. As you age, you learn new data, facts, semantic memory. That's crystallized intelligence, it's called. Anything you know is crystallized intelligence. But fluid intelligence is how you can make judgments and how you determine how to fix problems. That's fluid intelligence. And it starts to deteriorate in your 20s. It goes down in your 20s. Now, it goes down very rapidly in your 20s if you're not doing anything to keep your mind active. But if you keep your mind active, if you do Sudoku or you do crossword puzzles or you're always trying to fix things and solve issues, you're keeping that fluid intelligence going, and it does decrease, but it's a very minimal decrease over time instead of a rapid decrease over time. And we tend to think of like Einstein being famous, and we only see pictures of him as an old man, so we think, wow, he was really, he had a lot of fluid intelligence in his old years. No, that's when he was famous, and so people didn't take pictures of him when he was younger, which is when he developed the theory that made him famous. We took pictures of him once he was famous and he was much older, and yeah, he worked on things, but it was a lot slower process for him to work on the materials of his theory later in life than it was when he was younger. So that's fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Memory can be much harder to recall, but it's still there. It's just pathways start to deteriorate as you get older. The brain is use it or lose it, and you want to use it. You want as good a brain as possible when you get older, and that's one of the neat things about teaching is I have to keep up with the newest trends and technologies, and so I have to keep my brain active, and that's one of the reasons I like teaching. It forces me to keep my brain active. The genetic predispositions will become active in your older years. Alzheimer's disease is increasing in the world. Absolutely increasing. So do you catch it from somebody? Because that's how it's increasing, right? How are we getting more Alzheimer's disease in the world? We're getting more Alzheimer's disease because people are living longer, and the genetic predisposition for Alzheimer's doesn't take effect in younger years. You get to a certain point in your age, and then the genetics start in, and you get Alzheimer's. So because we're living longer, we're seeing more Alzheimer's disease, and hopefully they'll be able to figure out the genetic things that cause it and stop Alzheimer's disease so that people can live in their older age, and it'll be a much nicer time for them. But Alzheimer's disease is a horrible disease. My grandmother did not have Alzheimer's disease, but she did have vascular dementia. My grandfather had vascular dementia, and that is where you have little tiny itty-bitty strokes. You don't even know that the stroke existed, but your brain is slowly getting eaten by the strokes, and eventually a certain point gets hit and you can't do a particular task anymore because that part of the brain has been destroyed. So I have that potential, and I get to be in my 80s. It is possible from my mom's side that I might have vascular dementia. So that is vascular degeneration amnesia. And that's the end of our section on developmental psychology. Are there any questions that you might have for developmental psychology before I go on to the next one, memory? Seeing a lot of no's, okay. All right. So let's talk about memory. Start this slideshow. This is a window. Has anybody ever done this? Wrap something around your finger or put a rubber band on it that means, you know, I got to remember that. I got to remember this. So when I get home, I'll remember that. Has anybody ever done something that, you know, ties something to your wrist or whatever it is to remember something? It's a common thing to do, and I used to do it. I used to have a little band. I'd take it out of my pocket and put it on my arm so I remember this. Then I get home and I go, oh gosh, I was supposed to remember something. But I have no idea what it is. Write it down. There's no better way to remember something than write it down. If you wake up at night with a thought in your head, oh man, that's a great thought, I can't wait. when I get up, and I'll tell my mom and dad, no, do not go back to sleep. Have a little book by your bed and write it down. Keep it in a note. Keep it in writing so that you will have it when you wake up. It's the only way to really remember things well. So write it down. Keep a little, you can keep a recorder, a voice recorder. Little tiny things today, they can hold hours and hours of stuff. Pick it up, punch it on, say what it is that you're thinking about, and then put it down and go back to sleep again. You sleep better too once you've written it down. And when we get to the sleep section, talk about dreams, your dreams get better as you write your dreams down. If you write your dream down, whatever it was that you dreamed about, your next dream will get better and stronger, and you'll remember them better. So write your dreams down. We'll talk about that in the dream section. Memories. Memory is pretty bad. Our human memory is not very good. And memory is any system, not human solely, but any system, human, animal, or machine, that encodes, stores, and retrieves information. Memory, however, is like an outline. So have any of you ever, the teacher puts an outline on the board, and then she goes by the outline and she talks about different things, and you've written the outline down. Then you go home and you take out your outline so that you can write down all the things that you remember that she was talking about, and you look at the outline and go, I have no idea. I don't have any idea what I'm supposed to be doing with this. So our memories are like that. When we bring up a memory, we bring up the outline, just the pieces, and we fill those pieces in with other memories of that particular event. But that memories of those particular event have maybe over 20 years, right? Oh, well, remember when? And everything that's happened in between that time and now also comes up with that outline, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the things that happened last year or the thing that happened 20 years ago when that outline was created. So we'll fill in the outline each time we remember events, and that leads to errors. We have trouble remembering information that does not fit our previous experience. If we have nothing to connect it to, this is what our life is like, and then something comes along that's absolutely different, completely different than our life, it's very difficult to remember that particular thing. Human memory is really good at the things we focus on, we pay attention to. If you are looking at your phone during class and listening to what the teacher has to say, you are not getting it. Wherever your eyes are, that's where your brain is. And yes, you're multitasking, you're doing whatever it is on the phone and listening at the same time, but it is not successful because it's going in one ear and out the other ear. You're supposed to be able to tell what that teacher said and remember it the next day. And a lot of students, they're playing on their phones, and I'll say, well, what did I just say? They have no idea. They heard it, but they have no idea. It's not stuck in their memory at all. It never went into working memory, and it never got into long-term memory. We're also interested, if we're interested in something, it's easier to remember. If you're in a class and you like that particular subject, it's easier to remember the material in that subject. And if the teacher's boring, oh my gosh, if the subject is boring and the teacher's boring, you're going to have a problem. Information that arouses us emotionally is easy to remember. What's interesting, when we're happy, we can remember happy moments, and if we remember a sad moment, it brings us down. If we're sad, it's really hard to remember happy things that have made us happy in the past, and when we do remember those happy things, we're brought out of the sadness just a little bit. It's not that we aren't sad anymore, but at least we're less sad than we were. Information that fits our previous experiences, as I said in the top, and information that we rehearse. But rehearsal is kind of interesting because we say in our head that information over and over and over again. I want you to remember these words. I want you to remember horse, car, chair, cat, dog. So you rehearse it. Horse, car, cat, chair, dog, horse, car, cat, chair, dog. But rehearsing it over and over again is not the best way to remember it. we'll talk about that in a minute. So human memory is a cognitive system composed of 3 stages that we work together, and it helps us to encode the information. That's better than rehearsal. It's encoding the information, storing the information, and retrieving that information. So encoding includes selecting, identifying, and labeling, which includes modifying the information that fits the preferred format of the memory system. During encoding, you have to elaborate. You don't just say horse, car, chair, dog, cat. You have to think about, for instance, a car driven by a cat with a dog and a horse in it. No, and there's a chair strapped to the top of it. And that is elaborating on the information. So now you have a picture of this, and now you can remember it better because of the picture. So elaboration is a type of encoding in which meaning from long-term memory is added to information in working memory so that it can be stored more easily and retrieved more easily. How many of you have heard of the War of 1812? Have you heard of the War of 1812? Yes, Catherine and Anna say yes. They have Alexander says yes. Ava, yes. So you've heard of the War of 1812. What year was the War of 1812? Obviously, it was 1812. That was what it, but can you remember who we were fighting? What war was it? Why were we fighting the war? Do you remember that? Anybody? Does anybody remember who we were fighting in the War of 1812? Yeah, see, it's really hard, the War of 1812, right? Well, let me give you another name for the War of 1812 that might help you to remember. Yeah, there we go. Lauren. The War of 1812 was the Second Revolutionary War. In 1776, we fought the war to become independent from Britain. And we won, but they didn't believe they lost because we were, better than they were. And so they were stealing our ships, they were stealing our soldiers, they were treating us like a colony, even though we had already won the right to be an independent country. And so in 1812, we declared war against them again and went to war against England again. Now, when you go to war with a country, it's better to have the war in their country, not in your country. Well, they came over here because they didn't believe that they had really lost the war before. They just given up because they were fighting other wars at the time. And so from 1776 to 1812, they treated us really badly. In 1812, we declared war against them, and they came over here and fought the war over here. They burned Washington, D.C. to the ground. But knowing that they burned Washington, D.C. to the ground means that in 1812, our capital was in Washington, D.C. It wasn't in Philadelphia anymore. So sometime between 1776 and 1812, it's not a long distance, 40 years, we moved from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. So it's information, right, that with the knowledge that they burned Washington, D.C. to the ground, oh, well, that's because Washington, D.C. was the capital of the country. And then the British fleet moved up to Baltimore because that was the next big city, was Baltimore. And Baltimore knew they were coming, or Balmer, if you're from that area, Balmer. They knew they were coming. And Fort McHenry was right there on the river, and that was the first place that the ships were going to come. And so they really fortified Fort McHenry. And the commandant of Fort McHenry went to the seamstresses in Baltimore and said, I want you to make me the biggest American flag ever made. I'm going to fly it in the face of these morons. Moron was not a word back then. I'm going to fly it in the face of the British. We are America, and we are an independent country. So they made him the largest American flag ever made, and it's still in the Smithsonian today. It takes up like 2 stories walls, and it's just huge, and it has holes in it from, the fact that they were at war. So the British fleet came up and they started bombarding the Fort McHenry. But Fort McHenry was prepared for them. And they had their own cannons, and they were shooting right back at the British. And it was quite a battle. And it lasted all day, and it lasted all night. And there was a guy on one of the British ships who was an American, and he was watching this battle during the day, and at night, and he sees a giant American flag. Oh my gosh, that's a huge flag. And then at night, he could tell that the fort was still there because he could see the flag, the bombs bursting in air, the rocket's red glare. Francis Scott Key, and he wrote that poem from his experience of this battle for Fort McHenry. And it later became our national anthem. It was just a poem at first. It had no music associated with it. And the reason it got associated with music was because we won some awards at the Olympics, one of the first Olympics, but there was no American, there was nothing to play. And they always played the country's, whatever it is that they have for their national anthem. We had no national anthem. So the guy knew that he had this poem, and it fit pretty well with a English song. And so we put the two together, and that's how we got our national anthem. But that was the War of 1812, and that's a whole lot of story, but it's elaboration. It's knowing all of these things about the War of 1812, and now you know a little bit about Washington, D.C., and the Fort McHenry, and the biggest flag ever made, and the national anthem. And you can put all that together, and it makes the story is easier to remember pieces of than just individual pieces, because you know that we have a national anthem, you know the American flag, you know Baltimore, you know Washington, D.C., and so you're connecting things to stuff you already have in your memory, and it makes it easier to retrieve that information. So storage involves retention and encoding material over a long period of time, and we try to understand the data we need to store before it's stored, and that's elaboration. And we can add substance to the data for later retrieval, and we'll talk about this encoding specificity as well later. Access and retrieval involves location and recovery of information from memory, and this can be facilitated by where you are when you attempt to retrieve the information. A lot of teachers, when we're in class, learn your name by where you sit in the class. So you can come in maybe a week and a half into the class, and they know your names already. Not really. They know where you sit, and they know your name based on where you sit. But if they meet you out in the public, out in Food Lion, they have no idea who you are. It's like, I know this face, but I have no idea who this person is. Oh, they're in one of my classes. Wait, they're in that, they sit over here. Oh, you're George. Because they can remember where you sit, and then the name comes up. So when we are where we attempt to retrieve the information, where we learn the information, we are better at retrieving it. How many paths we have to the data we want to retrieve, and that's the story I just gave you about the War of 1812. Both are related to encoding specificity, and besides the three functions of memory, there are three different memory processes as well. There's sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory comes from your senses, and we have 5 major senses, and we'll talk. We actually have more senses than that. We have 5 major senses in the sensation and perception chapter. We will talk about more than just the 5. But of those 5, just the 5, each one has 16 different pieces of information coming to us. 5 times 16, and it only stays in our head for about a quarter of a second before it's flooded with more information. If it stayed for longer than a quarter of a second, the world might change and we don't get the information, so it's got to keep flowing. It has to keep flowing. And if we don't get rid of the information fast, then the new stuff coming in is going to just overwhelm us. So it's a quarter of a second and it's gone. And it may be that autism is that they can't get rid of it fast enough. And so they're overflowing with all this information. And then just one more thing, you hug them and they freak out. Or you say something and they freak out, or they see something new and they freak out because there's just too much already and you just added something else to the mix. So we have to be very aware of our world, and the way we're doing that is through our senses. And the two major types, of course, are iconic memory, the things that come in through our eyes, and echoic, the things that come in through our ears. And those may be the two things that actually are overpowering the autistic person. We also have people that are eidectic or have photographic memory. Eidectic memory is called photographic memory. And children, young children, before they begin to read, they have a great deal of photographic memory. They can remember things really easily through pictures. And there's actually an autistic person who has their PhD who wrote a book, Thinking in Pictures, Temple Grandin. And she says, people talked to me when I was young, and I heard them talking, but I had no idea it was a form of communication. I saw things in pictures in my brain. I didn't use language. Language was unfamiliar to me. So pictures. Eidectic memory, memorizing stuff by pictures. Adults do not have this. There are some. There's a few that I had a boss who had photographic memory. I was a systems analyst and computer engineer, and we took care of a lot of mainframes and mini computers. And there was a room that there was just all books on how these computers worked and what was wrong with them and how to fix them. And I would go to my boss and say, this is what's happening. And he would scratch his head and he would go, the third shelf from the ceiling, the sixth book from the left, page 126. And I'd go pick up that book, and it's laid out. That's what's happening. This is how you fix it. He had perfect photographic memory. I was like, oh my God, I wish I had that. Don't you wish you had that? So that you could just read your history book, and then you never have to do anything else. Somebody asks you a question, you just go, oh, it's on that page? Nope, this is it right here. I can see it right in front of me. That would be so great. He says it's not so great. He says because most of the time there's things, it's like cellophane. You write on cellophane, you can see what's on the cellophane. You write on another piece of cellophane. He says like having 30 pieces of cellophane in front of you all the time, and you don't see the world the same way that other people see the world as an adult with photographic memory. And why don't all adults have photographic memory if some of them do? And why is it that the rest of us don't? And if children have photographic memory, why don't we keep the photographic memory? And research with Aboriginals shows us the reason. You go to an Aboriginal society where they've never even heard of reading. They don't know that there's words, that you could write down on a book. They just talk. And those Aboriginal societies, adults have photographic memory. And then you teach them to read because they're Aboriginals and they have to be able to read the Bible. And they lose their photographic memory. So reading, learning to read, interferes with the photographic memory in most people. And we teach our children to read, and so they have photographic memory up to that point, and then they start to lose their photographic memory as they start to read in most people. And there are a few that don't, which is just cool. Remember, development is on a spectrum. There are some people that are different than others. So working memory, it preserves the recently perceived offense in our sensory memory. We pay attention to a certain number of those events, like the words that I'm saying to you coming through your echoic memory, and you're putting them into working memory and then immediately taking that working memory and understanding what it is that I'm saying and putting it into long-term memory. So if I stop talking, and wait for 20 seconds, it'd be very difficult for you to remember what it is that I said 20 seconds ago, because working memory only lasts for about 20 seconds. And we will talk in this chapter about a man. I will show you a video, actually, probably next week on Tuesday, of a man who has lost his memory, his ability, not his memories that he had up to the point that he lost his hippocampus, but when his hippocampus died, he has no memory from that point onward. It's 40 years later, and he still thinks it's 40 years ago when he wakes up in the morning. Sort of like 51st Dates, but not like 51st Dates. We'll talk about him when we get to that point. So we only last for about 20 seconds in our working memory, and we have to find a way to use that information and put it into our long-term memory, and to understand what it is that's being said to us and what we're seeing and what we're feeling. We can only hold, now sensory memory is flooding us with 5 times 16 pieces of information, but working memory can only hold 7 items, plus or minus 2, somewhere between 5 and 9 items. We have to pay attention to the things that are important from our senses and put them into working memory, because working memory can't hold it all. And if it could hold it all, it would better not hold more, 20, 25, 20, a quarter of a second. It holds it for 20 seconds. That's 4 times 20 amounts of information flooding our system. You couldn't. You would be overwhelmed. So it only holds that information for 20 seconds, unless you're refreshing it by rehearsing the information. Like I said, horse, car, chair, cat, dog. Can you remember that from when I said it a long time ago? So long-term memory stores material organized according to meaning, also called long-term memory, LTM. It appears to be unlimited in capacity. We know from people who have surgery on their brain that when they're awake and you can touch their brain in certain areas and a memory comes back that they have no knowledge they knew. It's just a long time ago. They're 63 years old and they remember something from 2 years of age or 3 years of age, and they wouldn't have been able to tell you that before the surgery. They wouldn't have been able to remember anything from that time frame. And it appears to be unlimited, so we can continue to remember things even in our old age. Each of these 3 memory systems encodes stores memories in a different way, but they work together to transform your sensory experiences of our world into a lasting pattern of meaning. I'm going to show you now 9 letters in a 3x3 square, so you know exactly what you're about to look at. Don't write down the letters, but try to remember all these letters. You have 1 second. I'm going to give you 1 second. And in that 1 second, your echoic sensing memory should be able to handle 4 times. A quarter of a second, a quarter of a second, a quarter of a second, a quarter of a second. At least 4 of them you should be able to get. Remember? But can you remember all 9 of them? And that's the difficulty. So let me show you these. Ready? For 1 second. Go. How many of you can remember any of them? Write it down. Type it in the chat bar. What do you remember? Cool. DHJB, all right. DK and a B and a G and L, J and an I, a J and an L. Wow. All right, now you're starting to remind yourselves as people start to type in the chat bar, okay? A, D, and J. A D and a J, okay. So again, how do we know that people actually saw all 9 of them if they can't tell us all 9 of them? You can tell me 3. Almost every one of you has at least 3 of them. And if I show this to a person and say, give me the 3 on the right, immediately after they see it, give me the 3 on the right, they could tell me the 3 on the right. Give me the 3 on the bottom. They could tell me the 3 on the bottom. Give me the 3 in the middle. They could tell me the 3 in the middle. Give me the column in the middle. Then give me the column in the middle. they can see actually on a 4x4 grid. We could do 16, and they can see all 16 of them, and they can give me 4 of them immediately. But by the time they're finished with the 4, the 20 seconds of working memory is already gone, and no, can't give you any more than that. So as soon as you're starting to write it down or say it, time is going by, and you're losing the information. So there's just too much information coming at us through our senses to understand and pay attention to all of it. If it stayed for too long, there would be no room for the next sensory input, and everything would get jumbled up, and we would be unable to function. So sensory information is gone within a quarter of a second, and we must determine what is important and move that important information into working memory as fast as we can so that we can use it, or keep it in working memory for longer than 20 seconds by rehearsing it. So working memory, short-term memory, also known as working memory, lasts longer than sensory memory because it's 20 seconds, but doesn't last as long as long-term memory because long-term memory lasts forever. And the capacity is about an average of 7 items. Some people less, 5, some people more at 9. Of course, I would love to have 9. It would be much better. You could hold more information and do more manipulation. Scientists probably have 9 working bins of information can be stored at one time for 20 seconds. Both long-term and sensory memory can hold more information, but sensory memory lasts for a shorter amount of time and long-term memory a longer period of time. The structure of short-term memory is actually already figured out too, some of it, because we have people who have damage to their brain and it damages their short-term memory in specific areas. They lose a particular thing that they can do. The central executive is a part of our brain that allows us to concentrate on a task without being distracted by other things. And the central executive matures slowly. Children do not have that ability. And as adults, most of us have that ability, but some of us do not, and we have to be on ADHD medicine for the rest of our lives because our central executive does not mature enough to keep us concentrating on things. And that was what was wrong with me when I went to school at 6 years of age. My central executive had not matured enough, and by 7 it was mature. But back in those days, they had no idea what ADHD was. It wasn't diagnosis back then, and there was no medication for it. But if there had been, they probably would have put me on the medication for ADHD. And then they would never have taken me off of it because we don't take the children off of it. At 7 and 8, we should be taking them off and seeing if their central executive has matured enough for them to be able to do what they need to do. They may not have ADHD anymore, but we keep them on that medication. And they don't have a chance to actually work with the central executive that they have to figure out how best to use it. But like I said, some adults, their central executive has never matured enough, and they need that. It works really well for them to be on that particular medication. The phonological loop is a fun one because the phonological loop allows us to remember things that sound good to us. We like certain music. We like poems that rhyme. Have any of you ever heard the saying I before E except after C? It's an English rhyme to help you to spell correctly. Lots of you have heard that. Did you know there's a second part to it? Because if you just say I before E except after C, there's a whole host of words that do not meet that standard. So there's a second part to it. I before E except after C, or in sounding like A as in neighbor or way. And at that point, if you know the two pieces, there's only 25 words that do not fit that profile. And so if you memorize those 25 words, every other word fits. The I and E fit. The I before E except after C, or in sounding like A as in neighbor and way. So that's a phonological loop. It also gets in our way as well. The phonological loop, the Beatles went to Japan, and they loved to talk. They actually, back in those days, after a concert, they'd actually come down and talk to the people that were at the concert. They don't do that anymore. But they were in Japan. Nobody speaks English in Japan, so they were very upset that they would be unable to talk to their fans. And as they're playing on stage, the fans are all singing with them in English. So it's like, yes, they know English. And they came down and They talk to them, and no, they don't know English. They memorize the songs because the phonological loop allows us to memorize songs. When I was in Japan, I memorized a lot of songs that I have no idea what they mean. Dongariko, dongariko, oi keme hamate satai chen dojo oi kite kite konnichiwa, boshoni shoni asopimaso. I know that konnichiwa means hello, but the rest of those words in there, I'm not even sure where one word starts and another stops and another word starts in that song. But it's still in my head in the phonological loop because the phonological loop allows us to memorize things easier. And the sketchpad is much like the phonological loop. Instead of sound, it's pictures. I'm about to show you 16, I just showed you a piece of it, 16 numbers. I want you to try to remember those numbers without writing them down. I'm actually going to give it to you for 15 seconds. For 15 seconds. So you have a long time. In 15 seconds, you should be able to memorize 16 numbers, right? No. But try to get them all in the right order, too. But there's a cue here. There's a clue. The clue I've already given you. Let's see if you see it when you're looking at them. Go. How many of you think that you could give me all 16 of the numbers in their proper order? Don't put them down. Just tell me, yes or no? Nope. Okay, nope. One person said yes. Lauren says yes. Nope. Maybe Lauren saw the clue. And I tried to give you this. I tried to give you this clue. All right, so let me go back and see if it will give it to me again. There are not 16 numbers there. There are only 4. The War of 1812, 1776. These are all dates. 9/11, 1945. I tried to clue you into that by talking about, that's the reason I talked about the War of 1812. So there were only 4 things you had to know because you know all 4 of those things, the 1812, 1776, 1945, and 0911, 9/11. Do you get that? It's called chunking. The world is full of things that you can chunk, but you have to have some sort of experience in life in order to connect it to the chunks. If you don't have the experiences in life, if your life is lacking experience, then you can't chunk. And that's chunking. And we'll talk more about that when we come back on Tuesday. If you have anything that you want to talk about, you can stay. And if not, you can go. I will stay here and talk to you if you need to. Have a good day and a weekend. Stay healthy, and I'll see you on Tuesday.